All right, I think we are ready to get started. My name is Liz Powell. I'm the founder of Women's Health Advocates, and I am so honored to have our moderator take the lead from here. Her name is Dr. Mitzi Crockover. She is a phenomenal leader in women's health and has been her entire career, many decades, as a physician, as an entrepreneur, as an investor. And she runs the very successful and extremely helpful podcast called Beyond the Paper Gown. So I highly recommend that. And she is hosting today's event. So I will turn it over to Dr. Mitzi Crockover.
Thank you so much, Liz. It's great to be here. And not that many decades. In any case, welcome everyone. As you heard, today's congressional briefing is organized by Women's Health Advocates, which is in all 50 states and dozens of countries. Our mission is to educate and advocate to advance the health of women. And as you heard, I'm Dr. Mitzi Crockover, and I'm honored to serve as both moderator and panelist today. Today, we are going to hear from expert speakers on a topic that, judging from the amount of folks that we had registered, is definitely a hot topic, all puns intended. We'll look at how menopause affects our bodies and our health, the economic impact, innovative solutions, and the investment needed to fuel those solutions, as well as how policy can make a big impact on this cohort of women and, in turn, impact our economy and our communities. We really invite you to put your questions into the Q&A. We will get to them as we can. And also, please be reminded this will be recorded and the recording will be made available to all who registered. But before we have each of our expert speakers share their insights, we have special opening remarks from Congresswoman Julia Brownley of California.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity to join you virtually for this important briefing. I also want to thank Women's Health Advocates, a community of researchers, medical professionals, stakeholders, and advocates who are working tirelessly to shine a light on an issue that has been overlooked for far too long: menopause. Menopause affects more than 1.3 million women in the United States every year, yet it hasn't received the attention or investment it deserves. Too often, many women are left without the answers, support, or the resources they need to navigate one of the most challenging stages of their lives. Like so many women, I have gone through menopause myself. I've experienced the symptoms. I know how disruptive menopause can be. That's why I believe so strongly that we need to break the silence and start treating menopause as the serious health issue it is. Here are the facts. 4 in 5 women experience problematic symptoms of menopause like hot flashes, night sweats, sleep disturbance, and memory issues. 1 in 2 women will develop osteoporosis after menopause. More than 80% of women experience memory issues and weight changes. These symptoms impact women's quality of life, their relationships, and careers. But menopause is not just about symptoms. It's also a health inflection point, raising the risk for heart disease, Alzheimer's, and autoimmune disorders. Today, in addition to menopause, millions of women are in perimenopause or post-menopause, meaning nearly every family, every workplace, and community is touched in some way by menopause. For too long, conversations about menopause have been pushed aside or ignored, and the consequences of that silence are enormous. Addressing menopause is not just about improving quality of life today, but also safeguarding women's long-term health. Symptoms can affect earnings, drive up healthcare costs, and reduce productivity, impacts felt by families, businesses, and communities alike. But there is good news. We are having this conversation. We are breaking the silence, ending the stigma, and saying loud and clear that menopause matters because women's health matters. Every woman deserves the resources, treatments, and support she needs to thrive at every stage of life. That's why in Congress, I've made women's health a top priority. Alongside my colleagues in the Democratic Women's Caucus, we've worked to identify disparities in women's health care and close those gaps. I also recently reintroduced the Improving Menopause Care for Veterans Act to ensure the Department of Veteran Affairs meets the growing demand for menopausal care. We need more investment in research, better education for both patients and providers, and stronger workplace policies so women are not left searching for answers on their own. And above all, we must elevate women's voices in the doctor's office, in the workplace, and in the halls of Congress. To everyone participating in this briefing, thank you. Together, we are changing the way this country thinks about menopause and women's health. And we are laying the groundwork for a future where every woman, whether she is 25, 45, or 75, can count on a healthcare system and a society that values her. Because when women thrive, families thrive, communities thrive, and our nation thrives. Thank you very much.
We're going to have a great group of speakers that I'm going to introduce one by one as they come up, so we can go to the next slide. And I'm going to give a little bit of an overview, both of menopause and some key issues, especially as it pertains to investment in menopause. So first of all, what is menopause? As a wonderful colleague of mine and also a menopause expert, Marion Stewart says, it's the anniversary of your last period. So it's 12 months without a period, and then you can say that you've been in menopause. In North America, it's usually a median age of 52, anywhere from 45 to 55. And in terms of natural menopause, it's a transition that basically represents a key biological transition impacting the reproductive hormones, most notably estrogen and progesterone, and their impact, as you're going to see, really goes all over the body. There is this time of transition you may have heard called perimenopause. It usually occurs 7 to 10 years prior to the cessation of menses, if you will. And that then begins, you do the math, around the ages of 35 to 45. And it may not seem very transitional. A lot of these symptoms kind of hit people, but it is to be compared with surgical menopause, which can happen after removal of the ovaries or the uterus, or medical menopause, perhaps after chemotherapy, which again, a lot of times these symptoms are very much more dramatic in these women. Next slide, please. So whoever said that death and taxes are the only things that you can count on was probably a man, but also probably a man who lived at a time when a lot of women didn't get to the age of menopause. But again, most of us will enter menopause, and it's half of the population, certainly. And it's also good to remember that this is not a disease. It's not a medical condition per se. It is just basically a biological transition. Next slide. And Dr. Morgan is probably going to go into this a little bit more detailed. My only point that I wanted to make in this slide is that these symptoms, again, start in perimenopause. You're probably familiar with mood swings. You've heard about mood swings perhaps and hot flashes, but it really affects every organ from head to toe and literally everything in between. And we also have to remember that Black and Hispanic women may suffer longer and have more intense symptoms. And that certainly is something that clinicians and innovators need to have in mind when they're trying to, again, create access and treatments for all women. Next slide, please. There's also long-term impacts. And when McKinsey reported that women spend 25% more time in poor health compared to men, even though women have a longer average lifespan. And so that really pretty much equates to women living approximately 9 years in poor health. And as Representative Brownlee said, it really affects our productivity, our quality of life, and even our ability to participate. Some very specific examples are osteoporosis or bone loss. 80% of people with osteoporosis are women. Many times that can lead to fractures and disability. The 67% of people with Alzheimer's are women, and 80% of those that care for them are women, that we'll talk about in a moment. And finally, heart disease, again, as Dr. Morgan will talk about, is the #1 killer of women. And all of these incidents of these issues increase as we get older. In terms of the long-term impacts on the economy and the workforce, studies have shown that women leave the workforce or at least are absentee because of these symptoms and because of the challenges associated with them, and also that there are increased healthcare costs as well. That's a typo, so I'm not going to go into the medical piece of it yet. Let's take the next slide, please. So, women spend more time in poor health. It affects 100% of women. There are productivity loss, economic losses, workplace losses, an economic burden that includes increased healthcare cost. So it makes sense that we want to accelerate bringing innovations to market in menopause care, because that will enable stronger and longer workforce participation, advance women and advance the economy, and certainly mitigate costly chronic disease. Next slide, please. So wearing my investor hat, I think about this, we call it what's called white space, gaps where we can, provide innovations, if you will. And so we know that women's health is a $1 trillion with a T dollar market. And the menopause market is set to reach $24.4 billion by 2030 globally. And that, again, is being led by this demographic shift. We're all getting older and rising awareness. Thank you, Halle Berry and Gwyneth Paltrow, to name a few, as well as, again, all of us like Representative Brownlee who have gone through this and, again, are being more vocal. And along with that, consumer demand is growing. Women control 80% of healthcare spending. We are 80% of caregivers, and that occurs mostly in midlife when we're taking care of our elders and our children. And the average person or average woman spends 7 to 10% of our lives in perimenopause or menopause. That is longer than pregnancy or motherhood. And so we see that investments in startups and new menopause solutions are accelerating, but the space is still underfunded by government and venture compared to other health segments. And the technologies that we're seeing are so exciting. You're going to hear from Janine Versey, who's going to talk about models of care for women's health and specifically for midlife women. We also have digital applications, diagnostics, therapeutics, as well as personalized wellness solutions. And all of those are just waiting to come to market and to improve women's health. And again, we receive about 2% of VC funding writ large, but again, it's been expanding, and we want to continue that trend. So I could have the next slide, please. So how can we change this both for women's health and for our economy and for our communities? Well, if we mandated insurance coverage and expanded reimbursement, for example, this creates stable revenue streams, and that certainly attracts investors. If we funded research and innovation, including non-hormonal therapies, but all the other innovations that we just talked about, and not just discovery, but those clinical trials in the forms of non-dilutive grants, SBIR, STTR, that de-risks for investors. That makes them more willing to come in. And it also gives them kind of a stamp of approval that this is something that they should be looking at and that there's a long-term commitment for that innovation. Be nice to require provider education and training on menopause and support centers of excellence that also include innovation. One statistic shows about 30% of OBGYNs may get specific menopause training. I'm an internist. I can tell you it was a lot less than that, and I don't think it's gotten any better. But we have, again, a number of professional societies like the Menopause Society and such that are trying to close that gap. But if we started from medical school and residencies, we could do a lot. That would expand the adoption and understanding of menopause. It would make solutions more scalable. And most importantly, patients' symptoms would be identified earlier, access to treatment would occur sooner, and result in better cost-saving outcomes. If we encourage workplace accommodation and benefits, again, I think Janine's going to talk about this, it would create employer demand. That would be new B2B markets for those innovators, and it would create a stronger workforce. And finally, if we prioritize access for underserved populations, that would again broaden our customer base and it would increase market size. And I know Claire Gill is going to be speaking also about some of these very specific initiatives that are addressing many of these issues. So now we're going to switch, and it's my pleasure to introduce Jane Morgan. She is a highly accomplished and cardiologist. She currently serves as vice president at Hello Heart, where she focuses on women's heart health. She also holds an appointment as an adjunct associate professor of medicine at Morehouse School of Medicine. And she was recently named by MIDI Health to the 45 over 45 list of top women's health experts, among many other awards. She previously served as executive director of health and community education at Piedmont Healthcare, and you'll recognize her certainly as a regular medical contributor on CNN. Dr. Morgan, we're so honored to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to be here today. When we look at hormones and hormonal pattern changes over our lifetime prior to menopause, we have the monthly rise and fall of estrogen and progesterone. If you look at the middle, though, of the screen and we look at perimenopause meaning those years that are leading up to menopause, where you are still fertile, you still ovulate, you can certainly still get pregnant, but your estrogen and progesterone levels are starting to change. And the overall result of that is that they are decreasing, but not necessarily decreasing exponentially. So there, it can be somewhat erratic. And that's where you can get these symptoms. The most common one that people know about are the hot flashes and the night sweats. But literally, there are over 75 or 80 symptoms of perimenopause, most of which not only do women not know, but physicians are not aware of them as well. And the symptoms, the reason for these symptoms is just what you see here, the erratic nature of what's happening to our hormones during perimenopause. I want to emphasize again, it does not mean that you're infertile. So you can certainly get pregnant during this time. So it's a little bit of a fun time where you're in perimenopause, but you're also able to get pregnant. I often get that question, and I want to be clear about that. And then postmenopause, let's look at what happens. It looks pretty flatline. We really have our hormones at the nadir, at their lowest levels. And this is oftentimes as well where we start to have even worsening of those symptoms of the sluggishness, more weight gain, as we look at both our estrogen and progesterone and even testosterone as well. Actually, our ovaries produce more testosterone than estrogen, and it's also a critical hormone. Next slide. And so why is a cardiologist talking about menopause? The reason that a cardiologist is talking about menopause is that menopause really has cardiac factors. And in fact, I would go so far as to say probably the most important endpoint of menopause is going to be its impact on the heart, because heart disease is the number one killer of women. The first heart attacks of women are more often fatal than those of men. And menopause is a time of doubling of your cardiac risk. So prior to menopause, your risk of heart disease is about half that of a man's. And then once you reach menopause, it actually equals that of men. And then by the time you're in your 70s, we actually surpass it. So menopause is a cardiovascular concern. Now, you may be hearing this for the first time. Believe it or not, cardiologists still haven't heard that. We are still trying to make certain that cardiologists are aware that these symptoms that we see during perimenopause are signals. They are biomarkers of advancing heart disease. We literally, with hot flashes and night sweats and vertigo and any of these other symptoms, are really declaring to the world, declaring to society, look at me, my risk of heart disease is increasing and no one is doing anything about it. It is not a ha-ha matter. Now, why does your risk of heart disease increase? That's because women's health, by and large, has always been reduced to just reproduction, as if these are the only organs that we have that are of any value. But it may be a surprise to you, maybe not, that we actually have all of the other organs as well. And once again, it's heart disease. It's our hearts that are actually killing us. So not only do we have estrogen receptors on our ovaries and in our uterus and on our breasts, we have tons of estrogen receptors on our heart. And it's that loss of estrogen that decreases the cardioprotectant effect of estrogen on the heart. And estrogen also acts as an anti-inflammatory agent. And inflammation is what drives heart disease, what we call atherosclerosis, the hardening of our arteries. We have these receptors on our arteries. And so the reason our blood pressure remains low to normal as we're younger, it's because of those estrogen receptors and we have compliance. So our arteries expand and contract. As we lose our estrogen, those arteries become more rigid and our blood pressure can rise asymptomatically. We will be unaware of that. And then why do I have this slide up? Because estrogen not only affects the heart, it affects every single organ system of a woman's body. We literally have estrogen receptors everywhere. Estrogen is actually the powerhouse of what is driving our body. So not only the thyroid and the thymus and the heart, but it's in our lungs and our liver and our kidneys and in our intestines and bones and genital urinary systems. Every single system is impacted by estrogen in women. And so it's really important for us to understand what's happening as women in the past 100 years are living longer. And so it used to be, especially in animal models, that really people didn't live much beyond their reproductive years. But now that we are in the last 100 years, and 100 years is not a long time in science, it's not a long time in evolution. We really just don't understand it. And that's the reason that we're here today, to make certain that people understand what's happening to women. And so estrogen being the powerhouse of a woman's system, heart disease being the number one killer of women, doubling that risk, and then the symptoms of heart disease being different than those of a man. And so you may not have this crushing chest pressure. You may not have shortness of breath. You may not have left arm pain. You may simply have fatigue or maybe some jaw pain or even back pain or nausea or indigestion that may not signal to you that you are having a heart attack. That delays care from you, but also when you reach the healthcare system, physicians there also may not recognize it and may relegate you to a lower level of care and concern. That delay in care in comparison to women is the reason a woman's heart attack is the first heart attack is more often fatal, and we see that risk increasing during midlife. Next slide. Estrogen fuels every single system in a woman's body. You can think of it as the car is running optimally, and then the oil runs out. It just starts to turn down and start to sputter. Not only do we see blood pressure increasing, but because of estrogen's on the liver, we see what? Cholesterol also having an impact. We have cholesterol rising, muscle strength decreasing, bone mineral density decreasing. So these fractures and the atrophy of our muscles, and then the increase in fat storage around our midsection called visceral fat, which is metabolically active fat. And the reason that we're getting that is because we're having increasing insulin resistance as well as our metabolism slowing. And so we see estrogen do any number of things, including all importantly, in the brain, decreasing our risk of dementia, and dementia increases as estrogen decreases as well. Next slide. And so when we look at hormone therapy, what has really happened in clinical research? Primarily, the major challenge in clinical research is that it simply doesn't include women. And so we do these clinical trials and we get these drugs and these devices approved by the FDA, and we simply extrapolate it to other populations, not just women, who are the majority of the population, but all global populations. US sends our drugs and our devices and our innovation everywhere. But the fact of the matter is, mostly white men are recruited for these trials, and globally, white men comprise only 9% of the entire world's population. And so what we really know about our drugs is that they work on this demographic. The other 91% of us, we really don't have information, and we simply extrapolate them. The Women's Health Initiative was a study that looked specifically at women, but actually it had so many flaws until it actually turned us back in time with regard to estrogen. And then prior to that, in the 60s, when we had the trials on thalidomide, and thalidomide had such a detrimental effect on pregnant women, it essentially, between these two trials, completely shut down research in women. Now we've seen beta blockers. I was just at the European Society of Cardiology meeting in Madrid. Beta blockers are the cornerstone mainstay of cardiology in protecting your heart after a heart attack. And it turns out in studies that were presented just a couple of weeks ago, beta blockers actually have a detrimental effect on many women. And because they weren't studied in women, we did not realize that. In fact, they increase your risk of a second heart attack if you've already had a heart attack, increase your risk of a heart failure, hospitalization, and triple your risk of death in women who have a preserved ejection fraction. That's critical information because we know we've done harm to women then over the past decades in prescribing beta blockers and not understanding why women are not included in clinical trials. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. That was a master class in menopause, so thank you so much. Our next guest and panelist is Janine Versey. She is the co-founder and CEO of Electra Health. And before Electra, she was on the founding team of City Block Health, a health tech unicorn that pioneered value-based care, integrating social determinants of health. Her career has also included roles at Google, the White House, the Department of Commerce, the World Economic Forum, and the Council on Foreign Relations. Like Dr. Morgan, she's a sought-after speaker worldwide on women's health innovation. And Janine, we're so pleased to have you here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crockover. Thank you to all of the attendees. I'm loving the comments in the chat and appreciate how much energy there is as people are taking time out of their day to learn, connect with one another. And I think that connection, people are trading LinkedIn links, is so important to moving this conversation forward. So in brief, I run Electra Health. It is a organization dedicated to helping women navigate perimenopause to postmenopause. We are a virtual clinic and we care for patients with menopause symptoms at the center, but also a mix of primary care and gynecology because our team are all experienced women's health practitioners. And the goal there is really accessible, high quality care covered by all types of insurance. So that includes Medicare and Medicaid, and really needing to be part of the existing healthcare system as opposed to something that is only available to those who can afford to pay cash out of pocket. Most Americans don't have those funds lying around to be able to spend on healthcare. They need their insurance to work for them. And so the big message here is that we really need, and I think you're seeing it in the comments, the policies to incorporate menopause care so that all women have access to that no matter what kind of health insurance or health plan they have. We've covered a lot of these types of statistics, and I think this topic of menopause is one of those ones where there's no shortage of statistics that are mind-boggling. For instance, the Mayo Clinic surveyed recent graduates in primary care and family medicine and OBGYN, and found that so vanishingly few, 7%, felt competent to manage menopause. And the way I like to think about this type of statistic is what we would feel, many of us are parents, if pediatricians didn't feel competent to take care of their young patients in puberty or adolescence. It sort of just boggles the mind. And I think we have to try to keep that shock at the forefront as we talk about innovation and health, because while we have seen a lot, it's really just barely breaking the surface, and there is so much more for us to do when we think about women across the spectrum. not just those who might be kind of tapped into longevity circles, or again, the people that are more affluent and able to pay out of pocket. Please advance to the next slide. So one one way to think about this, and I think in the comments, people were asking about certified menopause specialists. So there is a fantastic medical society called the Menopause Society, and they have a program and a form of a credential where clinicians actually have to take a pretty rigorous test and receive that credential to be considered a certified menopause specialist. And what that tends to mean is that they are confident and competent and equipped to care for menopausal patients, including managing what we call colloquially HRT or menopausal hormone therapy. But if you take the number of women that are in the US today, from the late 30s to call it 64. And we see plenty of patients that are in their late 60s and 70s, but you just take that slice of the population, bit of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and some of the 60s, and you get this statistic of, one specialist available for 32,556 American women. That is shocking, unacceptable. And so, whatever we do, we have to think about expanding access to high quality care dramatically. And one of the ways we do that at Electra is by focusing on virtual care because it allows us to be much more efficient. And frankly, our patients and members are the busiest women on the planet. So, taking the time out of their day, taking time off of work, figuring out childcare to go to the doctor's office for a visit is oftentimes less desirable than being able to schedule something for a telemedicine visit early in the morning, late into the evening, even on the weekend. And I think it's really important as we think about policy where telemedicine has been considered pretty mainstream, but we still have some work to do from a legislative perspective to be able to have protections for telemedicine care and access to convenient care. Because without many, many more people accessing care, this number is only going to get worse. So we need to find ways of broadening access, increasing convenience, not making it more difficult for people to be seen by providers and treated as needed. So some of the obstacles that we see are, digging in deep, really around, why is it that we don't see better access? I personally believe it's really important to follow the funds in all parts of healthcare, but in this one in particular, we have to think about reimbursement. Why are there not more providers incented to be taking care of menopausal patients? And I have heard from healthcare administrators, they would never say it on the record, but that the reimbursement is simply not high enough for a 30-minute, 60-minute, 90-minute, whatever time is required to spend educating that patient about their opportunities for treatment and for care. It is better to just not see that patient at all. And so this is even more true when we talk about Medicaid plans and other lower reimbursing plans. So we have to look at funding menopause care on par with other types of medical care. And I'm sure among my panelists, know the statistics of what certain procedures and care for men are reimbursed relative to what it is for women. So I think if you're in the policy realm and you have one takeaway, it would be let's look at that reimbursement. I think Dr. Morgan has spoken about, Dr. Crockover has spoken about the impact of of provider education. We need more of it. I think it's improving, but got to keep banging on that drum. And then patient education is incredibly important. And in this day and age, there's so much confusion out there, so many myths around what hormone therapy can do for you or not do for you. The pendulum is really swung. I think the public is paying more attention to what hormone therapy can deliver safely and effectively. But in some ways, it's almost going in the other direction where it is being touted as, uh, you know, sort of magic bullet. And I think it's very dangerous for us to think about, anything being a silver bullet. It's always, for all types of healthcare, we need a combination of thinking about lifestyle, thinking about medical interventions, thinking about psychosocial support. And so that's, one piece of the patient education puzzle that I want to emphasize. One thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about is what does access to high quality menopause care for women of color look like? Our chief medical officer, who was very early on at One Medical, she's a primary care provider. She spent her whole career focusing on the intersection of primary care and women's health. And what we see is that women who are lower income, who are Medicaid members, tend to be beset with worse symptoms, longer duration, earlier onset. There's variation by race and ethnicity. That's also true if you look across the world. So different populations experience different constellations of symptoms. But the fact is that for the exact same symptomatology, Medicaid patients are 50% less likely to be treated with the gold standard um, evidence-based treatment. And that is truly unacceptable. 40% of the population is insured by Medicaid. And at a time when Medicaid itself is really under attack, I think it's crucial that we think about preserving these benefits for that population and doing what we can to make sure that this kind of care is equally accessible for all types of women. I think I've kind of already covered the fact that there is increasing research on the impact of menopause in more disadvantaged communities. The last thing I'll say, because we have at Electra spent a bit of time on working with employers, is that employers tend to invest in benefits around fertility and family building more than they do menopause. This is changing slowly over time, but it only changes when the actual workforce puts up their hand and asks for those benefits, because when the HR teams and the finance office looks at spend of employers on healthcare, the line items that jump out are fertility treatments, pregnancy, and NICU stays. And so those are the kind of top concerns for the folks that are managing healthcare spend at a company. It is not net menopause is not necessarily showing up as a huge cost item to them. And so they are tending to overlook it in favor of fertility and family building solutions. And the answer is we need both. We need to support women at every age and every stage. And so I would encourage this group and everyone that is listening to go back to their employers and to be able to beat the drum, because until employees ask for these benefits and show that they may be 1 in 5 who are affected by symptoms in this time of life, they're not going to necessarily be receiving benefits from their employers or their health plans. Finally, on the health plan topic, Electra is very proud to now be available to 100% of New York women or thereabouts. So what that means is that we go in network and provide specialized menopause care through insurance to every type of payer and every type of health plan that we can. And we get these desperate messages all the time, like I have this plan. When are you going to be in network? I think it's really important, and health plans are starting to see this. But again, hearing from their members is the best way to bring these benefits into the insurance coverage. So patients are desperate, but once they have access to menopause specialists covered by their insurance, we get unbelievable every day when I'm feeling bummed out about, something that's happening in the world, or frankly, running a startup can be difficult. It is like looking at the messages that we get from our patients and how grateful they are that Electra accepts their Medicaid plan. And we want to be able to do that in every state. So anything that you can do to help us bring this unique model of care, that includes coaching and education and medical care, to the widest possible audience, please be in touch. Thank you so much for your time.
Janine, thank you so much. And now that hopefully after this event, people will have some numbers to bring both to their employers and to insurance companies to show the benefit not only to the individuals but to the organizations themselves. So thank you so much for your great comments. We're going to move on to introduce Assembly Member Linda Rosenthal. Assembly Member Rosenthal represents New York's 67th District on Manhattan's Upper West Side, where she has served since 2006. She's built a strong reputation for her work on women's health, affordable housing, and animal welfare legislation. Before her election, she spent over a decade working with Congressman Gerald Nadler as his Manhattan Director of Special Projects, and in recent years, she has become a leading voice on menopause and perimenopause policy in the State House. So, Assembly Member Rosenthal, we're eager to hear your perspective, especially from the state perspective.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I do represent the 67th Assembly District. It's the Upper West Side and includes parts of Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan. I'd like to thank the women's health advocates and everyone here for this insightful panel and for giving me the opportunity to share some of the work we're doing in New York State to help foster a long overdue conversation on women's health and ensure women receive the care they're entitled to. And we know for far too long, as we've heard earlier, women's health has been dismissed, under-researched, and pathologized. In fact, in 1977, FDA policy recommended excluding women of childbearing potential from early phase drug trials, and that arose out of the thalidomide tragedy. That policy was so broadly interpreted that it effectively barred most premenopausal women from participating, leading to a lack of data on how medical treatments would affect them and setting us back so many years, and we're still trying to recover. In the 1990s, there was the Office of Research on Women's Health was established at the NIH, and in 1993, the law passed requiring inclusion of women in NIH-sponsored clinical trials. Yet despite these efforts and some policy changes, the historical disregard for women's experiences persists. As recently as 2018, a review published in the medical journal Pain Research and Management found that doctors view men with chronic pain as brave or stoic, while viewing women with the same condition as emotional or, yes, hysterical. In one particularly telling example, women who went to the emergency room with severe stomach pain had to wait almost 33% longer than men with the same symptoms. And I'm sure that many of us here today understand this constant battle, and it's a fight that I work on here in the New York State Legislature. Menstrual health was a topic swept under the rug for decades, deemed too uncomfortable, too inappropriate, too unimportant to discuss in our legislative chambers. And of course, it was only as more women took office that we began to chip away at the silence and stigma. You know, even today, when I bring up some of my bills on the floor, some of my male colleagues shudder, don't want to hear it. And I've had colleagues avoid sponsoring some routine bipartisan initiatives like a resolution marking Menstrual Equity Day. But over the last decade, I've been proud to lead the charge for menstrual equity in New York State, including axing the tampon tax in 2016, recognizing that menstrual products are essential health items, like fruit roll-ups that were not taxed. Next, we tackled period products. We passed laws providing free menstrual products in schools for students grades 6 through 12, in homeless shelters, correctional facilities statewide. And, you know, I'm proud these laws are helping ensure that our biological function is not a barrier to education, dignity, or well-being. And most recently, we fought for ingredient transparency and safety. My first in the nation law required ingredient labeling on menopausal products to empower consumers. And I'm especially proud that while it's a law in New York State, many manufacturers have decided, you know what, we're going to do this in other states as well. And most recently, we passed my bill to ban PFAS from menstrual products. Hopefully, the governor will sign that soon. So, together, these laws have empowered women to make informed choices of what they put in and on their bodies. It's helped to break down the stigma that shrouded periods for generations. So, each of these victories represents a step forward, not just for menstrual health, but for women's health more broadly. And it shows that when we work together, make our voices heard, and demand better, we can break down taboos and advance forward-thinking legislation. So we know the battle for women's health doesn't stop at a certain age, and the next step in terms of lawmaking, I believe, is to help protect and empower women experiencing perimenopause and menopause, and to ensure they have the care and the support and the resources they need. As we know, this natural part of a woman's life has been dismissed, treated as something we don't really want to talk about. So I've introduced some bills to provide comprehensive support and break longstanding stigma. I will be pushing for their package when we resume session in January. So these bills are not just about managing symptoms, but ensuring women are treated with dignity and have access to proper care. So one bill would strengthen our labor laws to explicitly protect menopausal and menstruating employees from discrimination. Someone's biological reality should never be a barrier to their professional success. So we have laws enshrined to protect pregnant women, and we must do the same for those facing perimenopause and menopause. By establishing a Bill of Rights for employees that recognizes the unique health needs of women experiencing these conditions, we can ensure that employers provide reasonable accommodations ranging from access to cool rooms with cooler temperatures to flexible work schedules, and basically a more inclusive and supportive work environment, because we know that too many women just have to quit their jobs, leave their jobs, because their health concerns are not being taken into account by their employer. Another bill I have is requiring the Department of Health to create an informational pamphlet on menopause that practitioners can easily access and distribute to patients, both virtually and in print. As we heard, so many women and providers don't know enough about this natural state of life. And so the pamphlet will provide evidence-based information covering all the stages of menopause and detail the range of symptoms, and including, the physical symptoms as well as the psychological and emotional, the mood changes, cognitive issues, and it will outline various treatment options, such as hormone replacement therapy, non-hormonal medication, style adjustments, just basic information saying what you're going through is perfectly normal, and there are ways that you can handle the symptoms and get support. And then finally, I have a bill that will ensure women can get the care they need by requiring that private health insurance companies cover all perimenopausal and menopausal treatments. This change will tear down a critical barrier that has kept many women from accessing support, ensuring that their ability to pay is not a factor in their ability to receive care. This coverage would include a range of therapies from medically necessary diagnostic tests to hormonal and non-hormonal treatments. This is a critical component of this legislative package, as many effective treatments are often not covered leading women who can't afford it to just manage without. And this bill would also eliminate copays and deductibles. So these bills are about sending a message to the people of New York State and to the country that women's health is not a niche issue. It is a fundamental part of public health, economic equity, and social justice. We can achieve a lot of good through legislation, and I look forward to partnering with all of you in this fight. Your expertise and your insights are just invaluable. And as we work on this and come up with other important measures, I look forward to educating women, giving them more power, and making sure that this stage of life is treated with care, respect, and support. Thank you.
Thank you, Assembly Member Rosenthal. You really, again, underlined the importance of working with our state representatives because we may be able to get some things done in the state that we might not be able, excuse me, to do so easily in the federal legislation. So thank you for your work in this area. Very quickly, a couple of things. We will be recording this and it will be available to everybody who registered. I don't know if it will be able to be forwarded, but we probably can make that happen in terms of making it available to others as well. That's going to be up to Liz Powell. And second of all, we are going to go about 5 minutes over because we did start late because of some technical glitches. So I hope you all will stay a little bit longer and till the end. So with that, I wanted to introduce our last, but certainly not least panelist, Claire Gill. Claire is the CEO of the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation, where she has served in multiple leadership roles for more than a decade. Also the founder and CEO of the National Menopause Foundation, which focuses on advancing awareness and resources for midlife women's health. And before that, she built a 20-year career in public relations and marketing, supporting national nonprofits and Fortune 500 clients. She is an active advocate and educator, and she is co-leading the upcoming Perimenopause Day on Capitol Hill later this month. So Claire, thank you for being here and for your, what I know are going to be really important words of wisdom.
Thanks so much, Mitzi. Thank you to Women's Health Advocates for having me. And thanks to all of my fellow panelists for the wonderful information shared. It's so important. And as a native New Yorker, I'm thrilled to see that New York is leading the way and doing such great work. And thank you, Assemblywoman Rosenthal, for all that you're doing. I wanted to touch a little bit today on what are some of those other activities that are happening in the state and the federal level when it comes to legislation. And as Janine said, I love reading all the comments and all of you connecting, and we need each and every one of you to be engaged in this work. Because if we're going to be about actual positive change, it's going to come from all of us advocating on behalf of women and their needs. So a couple of years ago, the National Menopause Foundation and Bank of America did a study on women in the workplace. And what was interesting was the discrepancies between what HR people thought about how their corporate culture was handling it and what the women employees thought. And why it's important is that the under-recognized need for menopause-specific benefits comes as 20% of the workforce is in some phase of menopause transition. And the number of postmenopausal women is expected to reach 1.1 billion this year globally. So we do need to pay attention to this, and we do need to take action on it. So the highlights from the study, again, just sort of looked over some of those discrepancies in what we think about our workplace. And I know it's been mentioned earlier that up to 30% of women leave the workplace. That has a lot to do, ladies and gentlemen, with some of the crisis that we have, in that women are not reaching the highest echelons of business because they're leaving the workforce due to these symptoms. We have to have that stop, and we have to support women to be able to get through this stage, manage the symptoms, and thrive. Next slide, please. So the state legislation that's happening is very exciting, because as we sort of wait to see what's going to happen at the federal level, and we'll touch on that a little bit as well, the states have been taking action. And as was mentioned, we partner with Perry to declare September as Perimenopause Awareness Month, the month before Menopause Awareness Month in October, again, to reinforce that perimenopause comes first. And we have 15 states now who have declared Perimenopause Awareness Month for September, which is exciting. The type of legislation that's being done, as Assemblywoman Rosenthal mentioned, there's lots of great things being done in multiple pieces of legislation going through, but I wanted to sort of give you an overview of what's happening. So several bills have been introduced that talk about insurance coverage mandates. And as we have covered during this ongoing presentation, making sure that women have access to the treatment they need is huge. And so again, that's part of what's being focused on in several states, including those listed here. Next slide, please. So the other areas that are equally important and that are being considered at the state level are provider education and training. I saw many comments in the chat about how it's very difficult to find a provider. And as Janine pointed out, there aren't nearly enough qualified clinicians to be able to treat the 1.3 million women that enter menopause every year. So being able to promote provider education or clinical training is super important, and several states have those types of advocacy working their way through. A lot of general public education and awareness. We don't know enough about our bodies and what happens to us. It's why it becomes such a shock when we reach this stage of life and women are like, wait, I thought I'm losing my mind. I heard about hot flushes. I didn't know about all of these other things. And as Dr. Morgan pointed out, cardiovascular, my other hat, bone health, all of these things that we do not talk about. So it is really important that the public awareness and education programs are also being promoted at the state level. We're very grateful. And it's interesting to see which states are actually looking to do these things too, if we look at the states that are being considered. Next slide. So workplace protections, again, very important. And I know Assemblywoman Rosenthal talked about what she's doing in New York, but it's really important that we look at how do we keep women in the workplace thriving longer and being able to manage the symptoms that some women experience during this stage of life. Not all, but many, many, many women tell us how unbelievably burdened they are by the symptoms of menopause. And I think it's really important that even those of us who do not experience that level of symptoms are supportive of the fact that other women do. And that's really what we need to be advocating for. It can't just be about advocating for what impacts me. It has to be about how do we collectively come together to advance all of women's health across the lifespan. But we're talking today about menopause, and that's certainly one of the underrepresented when it comes to how is it impactful in the workplace. So you may have seen some of the articles recently about Rhode Island was one of the first to enact legislation around workplace initiatives. But even then, there's been some discussion about where it comes within the legislation because it's actually funded under the Disability Act and women reacting to that. And again, we have to think through the process and be strategic and supportive of how all of these things are coming together and not get so hung up on verbiage, because in the end, we need to make sure that these advances are happening at every level. Next slide, please. So what's the status of all of this great work? And I say it often on the national level and at the federal level, and again, we're going to be talking that in a minute. Enacting or introducing the legislation, I should say, is just the first step. If it doesn't get all the way through the process and get to the actual becoming law part, we're not doing our jobs. And so that's what we have to work on together. And so of those mentioned earlier, 5 have been enacted, 11 remain in committee, 7 have passed in some capacity, some with some pending enactments. 5 were either vetoed or died in committee, and then 1 was amended. And so again, we're making progress. We have a lot of work to do together. Next slide. Federal legislation, again, great interest and thankfully awareness around legislation at the federal level. dozens of bills introduced in the last Congress and this Congress. Again, we need to push these through to enactment and make them law. And very, very grateful to the legislators at the national level looking to really change the dynamic in terms of the level of funding for women's health research, ensuring that medical providers and professionals are getting the training that they need, increasing awareness campaigns in general so women have it, and then giving access to women at all levels to the treatment and the care that they need. And again, need to make sure that all of these get through. Next slide, please. I think it's the last one. So a couple of the things, again, all bipartisan support, so that's wonderful. And we do need to make sure that we keep championing those who are doing this work for us. So Senators Murray and Murkowski have been, part of this for last couple of years, working to bring this to 20 co-sponsors total. And in the last Congress, the Menopause Research and Equity Act that Representatives Clark and Lesko put forth, 57 co-sponsors total. I don't know. I know at that menopause stage, we know what age we are, but if you remember I'm on Capitol Hill from Schoolhouse Rock, you'll know that 57 co-sponsors and 20 co-sponsors do not get us there. So again, lots of work to do, and encouraging all of you that are involved in this webinar to engage with those of us on the panel and with other great organizations working in this space to help us get these across the finish line. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire. That was really impactful. And again, a good reminder that maybe menopause is the one great convener, if you will, in any case. We have gone past our allotted time. I thank everyone, certainly our panelists, for your wisdom, your expertise, your passion, and for being here today. G2G Consulting and Women's Health Advocates for inviting us to do this and to have this made available. Want to, again, thank everybody who has stayed online and has been online. We will have the recording available to those who registered and perhaps even more. And we really, again, invite you to get more involved through Women's Health Advocates, womenshealthadvocates.org. Reach out to any of us that are on the panel. Check into Beyond the Paper Gown. We're going to have a synopsis of this as well as an episode. And again, thank you all for your time. And again, I hope hopefully you found a lot that you can do, and this has inspired you as well. Thanks very much.